Sorry for those of you joining on YouTube, you will have missed the first thing I said, which I'll back and quickly do again, is we're looking at genre. You'll find this PowerPoint in your modules, and we talked about there being different types of genres within Gothic. One of the most important that you will be touching on is New Gothic or Female Gothic, which you'll find loads of stuff on the YouTube channel. There's Northanger Abbey there, which is well worth watching, which sort of investigates and satirizes Gothic novels, right up to Wuthering Heights there, which you'll be doing. Jane Eyre is a book that I particularly love. Genre conventions. There's the Ghost Mouse from Goth Girl, one of my recommended readings for primary school. We talked about subject and theme, setting and character, plot and perspective as ways of looking at books and literature, films, and we'll come back to that time and again. Subject is often supernatural events, some sort of unexplained mystery, can be madness as well. But the plot structure is normally that the unexplained is then explained. New Gothic or Female Gothic is often parodying the original sort of genre. And then we'll look at, though it does have themes of romance like Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, similar to courtly love in romances, it also looks at greater questions like Frankenstein, which sort of looks at what is it to be human. And that's always one of the questions of the Gothic. Just going to get that text worn out as well. So the character set is not that far off the stock conventional characters of fairy tale or romance as well as a genre. The virginal maiden, the damsel in distress, the old foolish woman, the hero, tyrant or villain, bandits, ruffians.
Right, baby.
Hello, testing. We're back again. Thanks for the shout out from the crowd there as well. Just getting into it as well. This is so irritating. Let's see if we can get it to rock and roll again. So we've got this sort of mystery plots that we were discussing. The important points is how the story is actually told, the perspective. So you will very often have a first-person unreliable narrator. So you question the action and what's going on. You will often have multiple narratives. So you can look at things at different perspectives, and this naturally calls into question the characters. You often have what's called a Bildungsroman story or a maturation plot, the story of somebody growing up, like Jane Eyre, from the girl into the woman. And the other thing that you can think about with Gothic is that I think it's James Secord, the literary critic, said a book is more than a text. And particularly the inscriptions, prefaces, illustrations, pictures, and photographs can mean a lot, particularly in Gothic literature, as in many other genres and forms. One example here is the book The Bad Beginning. I don't know if you know Lemony Snicket. It's being serialized and adapted on Netflix right now, but there was the Jim Carrey film quite a while back now. It starts with the inscription, "To Beatrice, darling, dearest, dead." The sort of morbid sort of obsession with the dead and supernatural. So I'm going to go super quick through this, and I want you to think about the sleeper and the spindle, but we can link it to fairy tales as well. Just I've got my text wall on. Gothic novel. You've got, first of all, like a sort of decaying, rotting setting, a castle, a cave, something like that. It could be an island, a different world. We'll look at that in detail. Supernatural beings or monsters, important element. Very often a curse or a prophecy coming true or being broken. That's the sort of the unexplained explained. We've got heroes, heroines, damsels in distress. This romance class. No problem, Karina. This is online. And the other thing about the Gothic is it's romantic, like Wuthering Heights. You get intense emotion, and that's important. Very different from the world of fairy tale. So decaying setting. Here we've got typical the sleeper and the spindle. Look at that. The skeletal soldiers in the Wall of Thorns. Here I'm looking at things like towers and houses. For example, Count Olaf's house in The Bad Beginning, or if you've seen Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, that's a sort of island and a house, castles, a dying earth, not in remote settings as well, which you're going to come to in Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, which is the misty moors, the Hound of the Baskervilles, for example. Supernatural beings here, weird levitating child in Ransom Riggs's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. You have ghosts, the unexplained explained, here using photographs to fake this sort of realism. Vampires, and we can think of Buffy and Twilight, etc. Monsters like Frankenstein. And the Gothic seems to be sort of like the past, the medieval past, or some sort of ancient world entering into the modern scientific world, and that's something how the photography works as well. There were curses and prophecies, like in Jane Eyre, the sort of the curse of the mad woman in the attic. There's an example here as well from the Baudelaire children in a series of unfortunate events, The Bad Beginning. It starts like this. If you're interested in stories with happy endings, which is what you were talking about, Rosita, when I bumped in, you'd be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there's no happy beginning, and very few happy things in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the three Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Klaus, and Sonny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful and had pleasant facial features. But they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. So we can see straight away, particularly in this book, of radical difference from the fairy tale sort of happy ending that perhaps we were exploring beforehand. Heroines and damsels in distress. First up, you look at the Sleeper and the Spindle. I'm sure you've discussed this already. How does that play on this sort of virginal maiden? The Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, and all Gothic, in a sense, allows for female heroines, which is little seen before, and also a sort of an idea of female sexuality and romantic ends as well, sort of as opposed to sort of male rationality. Which you'll see in Northanger Abbey, investigated very strongly. I'd recommend. That's Catherine Morland there. Felicity Jones from Rogue One, isn't it? In that lead role. Fantastic. Testing, and there we go as well. Intense emotions. Thanks, Christian. Unless very important about the Gothic is it's anything but rational and reasonable. It's about sort of emotion and romanticism. And so you'll get lots of intense emotion, whether it's madness, like in Jane Eyre, lots of interior life and psychology, contra the fairy tale, and also what's called pathetic fallacy, very good technical term, which is not only humans experiencing intense emotions, but all of nature seems to be experiencing intense emotions, having a bit of a day of it. Yes. Now, I'm not going to deal with this at the moment in great detail. Going to just have a look at it. This is the tremendous Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Great book. Fantastic BBC adaptation of it. Obviously, when you move on from fairy tale to Gothic, what you do get is you get characterization on a different level, and that's something that you can explore. I'm going to go really quickly through this because we can bring it up as we look at film later as well. So there's terms for characters, different sorts of characterization, direct and indirect, ways of looking at it, speech, the stele, mnemonic or acrostic, often used, and then an exploration, which hopefully we'll have time for in the course meeting, of imagery, literal language. And that's a big distinction here because there's no sensory description or feelings in a fairy tale. and figurative language as well, which there are none of there either. Similes, metaphors, exaggeration, and personification, of which pathetic fallacy is a type. So these are also areas in terms of characterization where the fairy tale it can be analysed and seen to be lacking, which are added in genres like fantasy. And particularly in the Gothic, which is a bit like fantasy, isn't it? But with this sort of idea of the dead. Got some characterization readings, and I'm going to just whip through very, very quickly. Because it ends up with the Queen from The Sleeper and the Spindle. And you can see here, from a traditional fairy tale, it reads, "It seemed both unlikely and extremely final. She wondered how she would feel to be a married woman. But at the end of her life, she decided if life was a time of choices. And a week from now, she would have no choices. She would reign over her people. She would have children. Perhaps she would die in childbirth. Perhaps she would die as an old woman or in battle. But the path to her death, heartbeat by heartbeat, would be inevitable." As you can see already, there's a very rich sort of interior life going on that makes this character description quite a clear departure from fairy tale as a genre and an investigation into a sort of Gothic fantastical world here. So how do you tie this all in? You want to tie it all into reluctant readers with the notion of reading skills. I don't know how much you've done on this, but this is well worth looking at. This is a précis with other sources as well as some of the things that are in Munden. We've got intensive reading, a sort of bottom-up approach, which we've talked about, and a top-down, text-down approach, extensive reading as reading strategies. They should often, or a good way to look at it is pre, while, and post-reading. I'm just going to look very quickly. Pre-reading, you can see here with Frankenstein here, the man who made a monster. Or is it the monster who made a man? Title, what type of text this is, pictures and illustrations, headings and headlines. What do they know about it, perhaps already through the conventions or schemata? Guess words, what they like to know. An excellent way of approaching reading. Here's Jane Eyre, the other Bronte sister. While reading activities, whether you have stations, something I use a lot, reading in turns, readers' theatres, extensive reading, so they just sit and read. Post-reading activities, here with Coraline from the sort of Gothic fairy tale by Neil Gaiman. 3 I know sentences, make a poster, 3 words or phrases. How does it relate to other stories with that sort of genre conventions, literacy that we were talking about, text in a text, a letter from a character, word clouds, and acting out scenes. Post-reading activities and extensive reading, how do they play together? Well, you could also do absolutely nothing, couldn't you? But some other good ideas, write a dust jacket blurb, Twitterature, tweet plot summaries, maybe to limit what you're doing with it, hashtags, etc., drama. And all of this is to be tied then back into this idea of intensive and extensive reading. It's all about motivation and how do you, yes, yeah, the review was in there, definitely. So I'm trying to sort of slip on. Is there? Exactly. Perfect. Right, online reviews. And how do you go from intrinsic, extrinsic? How do you negotiate that, particularly in the idea of integrative internalization? There's a whole lots of other stuff after that of some of the, I was just riffing on ideas of how to do this. That's enough from me for this section. What I'd like you to do now is we've just got a mere 20 minutes left. So I'd like you to go back into your same groups, perhaps not reorganize yourselves, and I'd like you to spend 20 minutes in group rooms 3, 4, and 5. Nothing new, nothing changes. And the question that you can investigate or think about, I'm hoping you've already sort of negotiated a lot of this because you've already been in lessons doing it, so it might make you more effective, was to look at the idea of the Gothic, but include the fairy tale in it. The question was, Gothic fiction offers excellent opportunities for pre, while, and post-reading activities. Why is this? Relate to your course readings. So perhaps you can think primarily at this stage about the Sleeper and the Spindle, but bring in other things and perhaps relate to fairy tale, to Gothic. What's the difference? Because that's what the Sleeper and the Spindle does. and obviously motivation, because reading strategies are really linked to motivation. So it's a chance to build on that. So off you go into your groups. I'm going to come around and listen in 5 minutes. I'd like you to reconvene here for the final countdown. It's the final 1500, just to set you free and to take any questions. Off you go.
Fly, O fools, fly. The enemy is upon us. Through fire, through water. Go.
And for those of you who are on the YouTube channel, that was a quick 20-minute additional. I hope you enjoyed that. I had to whip through the Gothic there. It's something I could have discussed at length, but the discussion tasks are there in the event. So, and further tasks as well, which come from these modules to do with characterization, which is a very rich way of working with from fairy tale into Gothic or into fantasy, to build on genre differences, to explore different areas of plot, perspective, character, setting, subject, and theme. That's all from me for the moment. So we'll look forward to seeing you again real soon. Bye bye.